the biggest problem I had was not, this is when I was working the Russian target. The biggest problem I had was not the KGB. The biggest problem I had was my co-workers at the place where I was working undercover, because they knew that something was wrong and I wasn't working there, and they would just pepper me with questions to try and find out who I was and what was going on.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest has over 20 years in the FBI and decades supporting the U.S. intelligence community. He is a leading expert in counterintelligence, human operations, and in national security strategy. He served as a liaison to the CIA Counterintelligence Center, was a member of the National Security Council Counterterrorism Working Group, and played key roles in Operation Iraq Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Today, he advises intelligence leaders, trains at the FBI Academy in Quantico, and leads corporate investigations as managing director at Chesley Brown International. Ladies and gentlemen, without further introduction, Dell Spry. Dell, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Gina.
I'm excited to talk to you. You have a very, very impressive career. And, you spent over 20 years in the FBI. You continue to serve in the intelligence community in many roles since. And I want to know, when you think back, was there a moment, as this is a mindset podcast show, where there was a moment that tested your mindset the most? And if so, what got you through it?
I think probably on the tail end of the Aldrich Ames investigation, Rick Ames, he is the CIA analyst that was spying for the then KGB, now SVR, and has several of our sources executed. But on the tail end of that case, I got involved in a assassination case involving Freddie Woodruff, who was the chief of station in Tbilisi in the Republic of Georgia. I think I know who did it. It was extremely difficult to prove, but I can make you a good case on paper for who did it. But that always left a big hole in me. When I got promoted to FBI HQ and had to have that case assigned to somebody else, and I didn't get to finish it. And that still bothers me to this day.
I have some, it's not as but there are certain things I think about that just you want to go back to and you want to revisit, and it stumps you. It just, you want to, I guess as humans, we want to complete things. We want to get to that, the missing puzzle. We like solving it all. And being in high stakes environment, as you just mentioned, and what's the mental edge that you think separates someone who survives or versus someone that thrives?
You've got to be, in the FBI in general, but particularly I think in counterintelligence and counterterrorism, you got to really be able to think on your feet. I'm kind of hesitant to say this, but yet it's a fact. You got to be able to come up with a convincing lie real quick and be able to throw it out there and then walk the walk and talk the talk until you can get away and rethink and reassess and go back in.
It's funny that you say that, because when I did that civilian SEER class that I did, we had a little portion of the class on if they were in interrogation. And then we had another portion on lying. And they picked somebody to come up and tell a story. And they chose me to come up and tell the story. And then they were going to, see if it was a real story or a fake story, and, see how I handled that situation and pressure and all that stuff. And it was a complete lie, the story, but I had to be able to pull from, it was a very emotional story to tell, where I was tearing up because I had to sell the story. I had to sell it. And also there are, the best lies have truth to it, because then you can recall it and you could remember it and you could talk about it. How did you learn this? Were there classes that you had to take? Was it something that you already came in with?
Gosh, there were no classes that I took that helped me to be a good liar. or to lie quickly. I think it was just maybe a talent I had or a talent I developed over the years. I just got to where if somebody would say something that was just a little bit off, I knew they were getting ready to go for me. And I'd prepare by redirecting them with comments I would make and start creating stuff as I went along. And of course, body language plays a lot into that too, where I've got to pretend to be exceedingly angry. How could you accuse me of something like that? And, make it look good and then stomp out of the room. And hopefully nobody chases me out. Then later I contact and we start all over.
That's really, really interesting. Would you say, here's my question then. How do you remember the lies? How do you remember the stories and things, especially when it's all of a sudden a high pressure situation? How do you remember that?
That is extremely difficult. And what you do is, as soon as you can, you begin to make notes about what you just said. Don't laugh at this. I'm being completely honest. You might go to the ladies' room. I'd go to the men's room and you start making notes, not writing sentences, but just putting words on a roll of toilet paper. And then you tear that toilet paper off and stuff it in your pocket. And then later you try and reconnect those words to what you were talking about or thinking about at the time and recreate the story. And then you just go over and over and over until you have it pretty much remembered. That's just one way of doing this.
Did you find yourself like in multiple different stories? Like, or was it in, depending on the situation, like, was it one story, one lie, I'm able to remember and do that, or it's like if you're meeting various people, it's all different. How do you keep it straight?
No, I was fortunate. I never had to meet a series of people and make up different lies for everyone. I was focused on one particular investigation every time, and I would spin a story to carry me through that investigation.
Gotcha.
I,
Okay.
I'm not smart enough. I wouldn't have been able to remember multiple stories and start throwing them out to different people. I
Yeah.
would have screwed up and told the wrong story to the wrong folks. So, gosh, that scares me to even think about it. I'm just
Oh,
not that smart.
well, especially in like the environment that you're in. I mean, it's high pressure. There's a lot on the table. I'm,
Well, let me share this. Let me share this with you, Gina. I worked
yeah.
undercover for a while when I was at the Washington field office, kept my story straight. But the biggest problem I had was not, this is when I was working the Russian target. The biggest problem I had was not the KGB. The biggest problem I had was my coworkers at the place where I was working undercover because they knew that something was wrong and I wasn't working there. And they would just pepper me with questions to try and find out who I was and what was going on. And it got so bad that once I was working for the not Homeland Security, Department of Health and Sciences, whatever, up in Maryland, and they had to move me to a different office because there were a couple ladies that just absolutely would not leave me alone, peppering me with questions all day long about, you don't seem to know a whole lot about the topic that you're here supposed to be representing, and you keep awful odd hours, and gosh, how is it you can leave early every day, and just stuff like that. And it just got very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that sounds very uncomfortable. My goodness. How long did that go on for?
Gosh, I was undercover, I don't know, several months. I really don't
Okay.
remember the length of time.
Wow, that's interesting. So, okay, so we talked about these high pressures and stuff like that. So then my next question then is, how do you stay calm and clear when the stakes are high? How do you stay calm and clear when they're pestering you and pestering you? And what can we as civilians learn from that, like on staying calm, especially in that
Okay,
high
let me,
pressure? Yeah.
first of all, it was never really a problem for me to stay calm.
Okay.
Now, there were occasions, obviously, when I was overseas, a couple times when I really thought it was over. Once is when I was working the Woodruff case. I was in Tbilisi and I was meeting with the head of the intelligence service. And when I got there, they took me into a room to wait. Then I heard it was a very sparse room. There was like two chairs and one table in. That was done to just try and intimidate me. And then I heard some footsteps coming down the hall, and they were walking in cadence. And then they stopped right outside my door, it sounded like. And I thought to myself, well, this is it. This is how it ends right here. And then they just walked away. But, stuff like that, you just got to be able to roll with the punches. They teach us all kinds of stuff like, trying to control your pulse rate, trying to control your breathing, but they can't help you with things like your pupils dilating or constricting when you're under pressure. And there are things that we're taught and things that we try and remember to do, and
Mhm.
there's stuff we just can't do, and we
Oh,
just live with it.
well, I've been in some situations that just my body reacts where I'm telling myself to just stay calm, be calm, but the body is just in a panic mode. It's just in that fear mode. And I don't
Yeah.
even know how, I mean, when I did the seer thing, talk about like the scariest part, like I willingly put myself through this training as a civilian, and everything about it was scary for me. I'm scared of the dark. I'm scared of anything that moves. I don't like being touched. Like there were so many things that I had to face throughout it. And, in that moment, you just make a decision and you just go with it. Like half the time, I don't even, it's just a blur. Things just kind of kick in, but also, things kind of kick in for your favor, because your body does want you to survive. But then there's also moments that you just you work yourself up so much, or your body works itself up where you know telling myself to calm down just isn't working. It's just not going to happen. um
Mm-hmm.
so, now let's talk about then, like, mentally. Look, what are some common mental traps that like even elite operators fall into, and how do you teach somebody to overcome that?
Gosh, you're getting way too sophisticated for me. I don't, I never had anyone try and teach me to overcome that. I'm sure I had problems with that issue, but
When like you're training somebody at Quantico, right? It's like, well, I
sure,
get that like they're already more than an average human. They're at Quantico, okay? Like,
sure.
so would you say that they already have some natural abilities that got them there? And then what would you say that the average human is lacking in terms of that they have, and that makes them easier to teach versus just anybody? If that makes sense.
When people come to the academy as new agents in training,
Hmm.
they don't always have that skill set that you're talking about. A lot of them will. And when they do, when they go to their first office, they're assigned to a squad where they can use that talent to their benefit. Others are sent to what we call in services to schools back at Quantico. Once they graduate from the new agents training, they go back for additional training. And there are classes that try and teach people how to adapt on the spot.
Hmm.
But does that kind of answer your question, Gina?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how would one then be able, or what would be some teachings that you teach to help someone adapt on the spot?
Well, it helps if they're a good liar.
And that would you say is just being a good listener and remembering things? Like, is it like good memory and being able to listen? Like, what makes a good liar?
Well, no, they have to be a good listener. And
Hmm.
we teach, actually, in the FBI, we teach what we call active listening. For example, I'm trying to interrogate you, but I want it to be a soft interrogation. I'm not going to bore down on you, but I'm going to be listening to what you're saying. I'm not going to have a whole lot to say because whatever I've got to say, it's not important. I care about what you got to say. But ordinarily, what people will do when we're doing these type of interrogations, they'll slip up and let nuggets of information slip out. Okay, well, I'm pocketing all those nuggets, and then I'll come back to you maybe a week later in another follow-up interview, and I'll say, Gina, when we were talking once before, I remember that you said, and then I'll use your words against you. And then if you're telling the truth, it's not a problem. You know how to get past that. But if you're lying, that probably is going to catch you off your guard
Mhm.
and make you start stumbling and fumbling for words and a new story to give me. And I'm just going to sit there and watch you unravel in front of me. And then I'll just make more notes and let you go. And I'll call you back the next week and we'll go to it again.
Did you ever read that book or the book Don't Be Deceived?
No, ma'am, I have not read that book.
So it's like a book in terms of they broke down like cases and they broke down politicians and they break down like where and they talk about the ways like some people lie or like how they slip up when they speak and stuff like that. I found it very interesting and after I read it a couple of times, become hyper aware of the way I speak because also there are times where and I think I said this in one episode of the podcast where we we just lie. We naturally lie through exaggeration. It's like, oh my God, it's 100 degrees out. It's not really 100 degrees. It might be like 89 degrees, right? But we need to exaggerate that cost. And sometimes I'm like, or I'll say something where it's like, oh yeah, that happened 3 times. And I was like, it didn't happen 3 times, it was 2 times. Why do I feel the need to round up? I sometimes catch myself now that I've been reading that book and I found that really interesting. Is there um I guess like truth to things like that, where like they talked about there are certain ways that some like when I was at Sear and I was telling my story, they said that because I told the story in the present, which I didn't even realize, I was just telling a story. But because majority of my story was told in the present, they believed it more to be true because it was like I was living that story, which made it seem like it was true versus when I spoke in the past. I said when people sometimes tell stories within the past, it's more likely that they're lying because they're not actually reliving it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you pick up on is that, I don't even know if that's a real thing. This is just what a couple people have been sharing, but is that some stuff that you guys look for and talk about and stuff?
We do have some unusual training.
Hmm.
The things that I ordinarily look for, the ticks and body language, the human things that if you're lying, you can't control, like we talked a little bit ago about controlling stuff. I've solved a couple of cases by I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the person, and all of a sudden I see their pulse just pounding out of their neck. But I just keep talking to them. I don't raise an issue, but I make a note that, hey, this has caused this person a great deal of stress, need to revisit. So, and then I'll bring it up again. And, at some point, I'm going to ask the individual, why does this bother you so much? And then if I get a lot of pushback and a lot of animosity, sometimes the things I do is it depends on the situation, but I will actually ask the person, how can I help? And if the guy feels trapped, they're going to want a friend. And they sometimes will, right then, not cough everything up, but they'll open up enough to get that immediate pressure off them. And then I've got the answer to my question. So,
So you really have to be like observant, you have to be aware, you have to be listening. And what about and that's all about for the other person, right? But what about self-awareness? Like what can we do to become more self-aware? And also it also sounds to me like you also need some good intuition. And I remember somebody on the show that was like, you need to develop that intuition. Like that intuition you have to get to know yourself. So, to me, when I talk about self-awareness, I also talk about developing that intuition. What do you think we can do, listeners on the show, to develop that?
I don't know how you develop intuition. If the person that shared that with you would contact me, I'd like for them to tell me how to do that. You do have an intuition
Yeah.
and you have a sense of
Mm.
something and you play that sense wherever it's going to take you. But things that you can do to maybe mask some of what you want to hide from people, practice controlling your breathing.
Mm.
That's a big thing because when people are nervous, when they're anxious, they start breathing heavily and they're really not even aware that they're doing it. I mean, just when you're just sitting around, honest to goodness, just take out a clock and say, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to control my breathing. And you'd be surprised how difficult that can be, but you can learn to do it.
Do you have a specific one that you enjoy?
A technique.
Yeah, like a breathing one. Because
Gosh, let me.
they talk about box breathing all the time. I hate that one. Like that is just like because I'm like I don't like not breathing. So I like a 5-5 where I'm in for 5 and out for 5. Like
Mhm.
that's my bread and butter right there. But when you have to like box breathe and I'm holding, I'm just like, like I don't want to hold. That doesn't calm me down.
Well, one of the things that I do naturally
Mhm.
is you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be, but this accent has got me into a lot of places, and I can sit down somebody who's not from the South. When I was up in Washington, D.C., I could do this all the time. I'd sit down with these people that were bigwigs in the government or bigwigs in corporate America, and they thought they were something special. And when I sit down and start talking to them, they get real relaxed by the tone of my voice and my words, and I can just see it on their face. They're going, this backwater hillbilly is not a threat to me. And I can get them to slip up and say things they don't mean to say. I mean, I'm serious. My speech has
Yeah.
really it's opened a lot of doors for me.
Wow,
And I
that's
think also I'm a kind of a friendly guy, and
mhm.
I make you feel, I want to make people feel appreciated, even the bad guys. I want to make you feel that I appreciate you because every person has a story to tell. I
Mhm.
want you to tell me your story. And I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to ask you a million questions, but I want you to know I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're going through. I appreciate what you've gone through. Let me hear your story. And people want to talk. Even the bad guys, everybody wants to tell their story if you can just get them to open that door.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very true. When I go around to do speakings and stuff, and I do a lot of kid speakings, and I always end with that. I always end with, I just shared my story. You guys all have a story, and I want you to share it because I want to hear your story next. And they get really excited. And that's the line I use to get them excited about writing because I'm all about increasing literacy. So when I say, share your story, write it down, they get all excited about it because it's just the way you phrase it. It's just like, you could say like, okay, we're going to do a writing activity where you guys are going to write about this. And they're like, oh, but then when I share my story and I say, now I want to hear from you, share me your story, they get way more engaged. They get way more excited to tell it. And I feel like just that phrasing, increases their interest. And
Absolutely.
and I want to know now, I want to kind of shift into like today's society. I want to talk about like how like so what society these days is lacking or personal accountability. Like how does that play in a strong society? Personal accountability. And do you feel like we've lost that at all?
Yes, I do personally. I feel like we've lost a lot of self accountability. I personally think one of the reasons is computers have become so popular. I
Mhm.
mean, people in an FBI office, they sit there across from each other. Their desks might be next to each other, and they will email each other rather than just say, hey, Jane, hey, John, did you know this? Did you do that? People don't talk and
Mhm.
they don't shake hands anymore. And
Mhm.
there's just that touch is gone out of society. And I think that is working to our detriment when it comes to honesty, because it's a lot easier to be dishonest with someone you really don't have an attachment to other than an electronic attachment. You have no personal attachment. You have no personal feelings toward them. They're just somebody on the other end of a digital communication.
What do you feel like we can like do about it in terms of let's like talk to people more, listen to people more, be more friendly?
I would say all three of those are great, but I don't know how you make it happen.
It's so interesting because I am the type of person that like, well, stop by your desk. I'm the type of person that would like go see if I'm thinking of my friend when I lived in Los Angeles. I just recently moved, so it's a little different here. But when I was living in Los Angeles, I would just pop in and see a friend. I'll just be like, "Oh, I'm in the area," and then and people don't do that, and people hate when you do that these days too. But I don't know. For me, I really like that connection. I feel like we're humans. We need that connection with each other. And I feel like you're right. Like the computers does make it easier to not feel lonely, yet we are more lonelier than ever. It's like I could become friends with somebody on a computer I never met. I'm on the phone, I'm talking to them, and that's was it like helps fill a void for just me not being out in society. And you're right, it's very detrimental. And when it comes to that detriment, it kills our resilience, it kills our grit, it kills our mental fitness. So, what do you feel like we can be doing on a daily to get back into that, to increase that mental fitness, to increase that resilience, that grit that we are not developing like we want, society's not developing like we once
I
have?
don't know what happened. You just locked up, or you?
Oh,
Okay.
did you hear me now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Did you get that final question or you want me to say it again?
No, ma'am, I did not get the question.
Okay. So what do you think that we can do, like any listener on the show can do on a daily to increase our mental fitness, to get that resilience, to build that grit that we are lacking in today's society?
Well, I mean, get out and go for a walk in a public park where your neighbors will be there. You're going to bump into people, chat with them. Just take a few minutes to speak and see how folks are doing. See who's sick, who's well. If somebody's sick, take them some cookies. I mean, there are things we can do just through casual engagements that will have tons of meaning to someone.
Now, what if we are that someone? What if we're that someone that feels stuck, that feels power, that feels like down? What would you say we need to do for ourselves today to at least make one step forward to getting out of that?
Well, you just said it. They've got to make that one step forward. I don't know individually what that step would be for any one person, but
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows, hey, I'm in a funk right now. I can't get out of this. I'm lonely. I don't know what to do. I'm depressed. How do I deal with this? Get up, go out and do something. Be around people. Be around your friends. Make a new friend. Go to the library and get a book, for crying out loud.
Mm.
And then, talk to folks about your book.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee.
You said something earlier that I wanted to kind of revisit, and you said, the you always seem, and I'm not saying it properly, so forgive me, but it was just something along the lines of hearing even the bad guy's story, right? And listening to them, and how do you have empathy when you also may have an emotional attachment to um
Gina, I know what
yeah,
you're saying. Let me tell you straight up.
yeah.
That can be off the charts, incredibly difficult
Hmm.
for a moral person like you or like myself or someone in the FBI. If I am interviewing a child molester. I probably despise that person.
Mm-hmm.
That person's sitting in front of me and I got no use for them. I want to see them in prison for the rest of their life. But I also have a job to do. And that job requires that I get as much information from that individual as I can. So, as difficult as it is, but we really do, there's no training for it that I'm aware of, but you just have to put your own feelings aside and press forward and do your job. And that might include you telling jokes to this guy, kind of laughing to build some familiarity with him, shaking his hand at the beginning and at the end of the interview. You just got to make this guy think. In my opinion, the way I like to do it is make this guy think I'm not that big of a threat and he can pull one over on me. But then I just talk and open the door. But if I go in there and through my body language, through my verbs, the way I'm talking to him, whatever, if I go in there and just try and let him know that I think he's scum, then he's going to be very combative. And when he starts being combative, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to shut down completely or I'm going to be combative in response. I've got to go in there with the feeling that this guy, I've got to get his story. And whatever it takes, I've got to put my own feelings, my own disgust. I've got to put that aside to get his story. So I put him in prison.
What is the best way that you feel like to disguise? Because sometimes I've noticed for myself, I am allowing some feelings to come out in an argument or in a conversation, and it's just coming out, and I'm like, whoa, hide it in, like that resentment, that anger, that disgust. That's a good word, that disgust. And it shows sometimes on the face, on the body, and sometimes you don't even realize it, right? So what do you do, and how did you train yourself to be aware of that so you can, like, for myself, I also would say things in my mind that would, like, when I used to be in resentment towards one person that I was frequently in my life, I would picture, like, I would just throw love at that person in my mind, just say all these great things about them so the resentment wouldn't come up. So, things can stay calm and even. And I want to know, what did you do anything in particular? How did you teach yourself to not allow that disgust to show on your face?
Yes, what I would do before I went in the room with this guy, I would just spend some time thinking about it, some deep breaths,
Mm-hmm.
and then I go in there. But my tactic would be shake his hand, slam him for having handcuffs on. But just my job is to get this guy to talk, and if I possibly can, get him to give me a confession. Aside from that, I have no other job. So I just sit down and I've got to just be friendly, be professional, and get this guy to start talking. Even if he's lying, that's fine. The first couple of times out, he's probably going to lie. I'm going to have the facts, so I'll know that he's lying. But then it's at some point, if I'm successful in doing my job, I don't want to say the term he's going to warm up to me, but he's going to feel like he's going to be comfortable with me and he's going to start talking to me. And as I get bits and pieces and bits and pieces, that's what I'm after. And I'll put all that together no matter how much time it takes. And then when I have a pretty complete picture, that's when I give it to my supervisor. And he runs it up the chain and see if they want to go forward and how they intend to handle things.
Do you find it easier to not have not have an emotional attachment? It's not like it's your wife or your kids or anything like that versus being at home and having a conversation with, you know, maybe your kid did something that you didn't like, or, your wife or anything like that. Like, do you find it easier because you're not as emotionally attached to that person and it's just a job?
It is extremely difficult. Well, for me, it is. It was extremely difficult not to have an emotional attachment. because if it was a pedophile, I would probably have photos of children that he had abused or she had abused. The vast majority of my career was spent in counterintelligence and counterterrorism. So I didn't have a lot of these type of problems we're talking about, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
I did in my career, I handled some criminal cases, but it's always personal. You have to make it feel like it's not personal, but it's personal.
Wow, this was really interesting. Thanks for being on the show and talking with me. I really, really enjoyed it a lot.
I've loved it. Man, this is great.
So I'm so glad. I thought you gave some really, really great insight. I think you're really fantastic. I really enjoyed having you on, and thank you again.